When the Alpha King asked if she was single, Nora lied. She told him she was taken, even though there was no one. There hadn't been for 3 years, not since the night he shattered her heart and chose his crown over her. But her lie would set everything in motion. Within days, his kingdom would be under attack. He would need her skills to survive. And working beside him, close enough to remember every stolen kiss, every broken promise, they would need to answer a question that had haunted them for years. Can two people who already destroyed each other once risk everything to love again? Nora had practiced her lie for 6 weeks, ever since she'd been forced to return to the capital. She had her fictional mate's name memorized, Darian, a merchant trader from the Eastern Territories. She knew his occupation, the way they'd supposedly met, even the carefully crafted details about how he made her laugh. What she hadn't prepared for was how much it would hurt to say it out loud. Alpha King stood 3 feet away in the moonlit gardens, far enough to be respectful, but close enough that she could smell cedar and winter on his skin. Close enough that her traitorous wolf was keening for him, even as her human heart screamed at her to run. The celebration raged inside the palace. His birthday, though he'd never cared much for the pageantry. But out here, it was just the two of them, and the question hanging between them like a blade. "Are you single?" Alpha King Nicholas's voice was raw in a way she'd never heard it. Not when he'd been crowned 3 years ago. Not even their final night when he'd told her he couldn't choose her, that the council would never accept a mate without noble blood. Nicholas rarely let his mask slip. He commanded armies with a word, bent kingdoms to his will, ruled with calculated precision. Yet right now, he looked at her like she held his entire world in her answer. She wanted to say yes. The words sat on her tongue, simple and safe. "Yes, I'm single. Yes, you destroyed me and I've moved on. Yes, you can finally stop looking at me like that." Instead, she said, "No, I'm taken." Her lie came out steadier than she felt. She watched it land, watched his jaw tighten, watched something wild and desperate flash across his face before his expression shuttered completely. The warmth that had been building between them all evening, that dangerous, treacherous hope she'd barely let herself feel, vanished like smoke. "I see." His voice went carefully blank, and she recognized that tone. It was the one he used in council meetings when someone had disappointed him, when he was locking everything down. "Who is he?" Nora's chest tightened. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To push him away before he could destroy her again? "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." His hands clenched at his sides, and she could see him fighting for control. The air around them thickened with his power. Alpha dominance barely leashed. "Tell me, his name? Nora? Tell me who claimed you while I—" He cut himself off, turning away from her. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, defeated in a way that made her chest ache. "Tell me so I can finally let you go." She wanted to tell him the truth, that there was no Darian, no Eastern merchant who made her laugh, no one at all, that she'd wrapped herself in this lie like armor to keep from admitting what terrified her most, that even after everything, she'd walked back into his court and felt the same devastating pull. But then she remembered the rumors that had reached her even in her exile, the females in his bed, parading through the palace in silk and jewels, the way he'd looked through her when she'd first returned to court, as if she were a stranger, as if those stolen moments when they were younger, when he'd been just Nico, her Nico, before the crown changed everything, had never existed at all. "Before we continue, can you do me a favor? Tell me where you're watching from so I can send a hug your way, because what happens next will leave your heart racing. Tell me his name," Nicholas said again, and this time she heard the alpha in him, the king who'd earned his brutal reputation, who'd crushed rebellions and brokered impossible treaties. But she'd known him before all that. She'd known him when he was just a boy who snuck her pastries from the kitchen and kissed her in the rain. Pride lifted her chin. You don't have the right to ask me that. He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. No, he agreed quietly. I suppose I don't. Not anymore. The distance between them now felt impossibly vast. Why did you bring me out here? Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. Why corner me in the gardens? Why now, Nicholas? She never called him that anymore. It had been Your Majesty or My Lord since he was crowned, careful distance in every word. But his name slipped out like it used to, intimate and familiar, and she watched him flinch. Because I'm tired of pretending. The confession seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. Because I've been watching you, keeping yourself just out of reach, and I can't. He stopped, his throat working. Because Lord Hayes asked me for permission to court you tonight, and I nearly tore his throat out in front of the entire court. Nora's stomach dropped. Hayes. Of course. The visiting lord had been circling her for days with his calculated charm, and she tolerated it because it gave her an excuse to avoid Nicholas. She hadn't realized it would come to this. I controlled myself. His mouth twisted bitterly. Barely. I told him I needed time to consider his petition, but standing there, imagining him touching you, imagining you choosing him. He took a step toward her, close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could smell the cedar and smoke scent that still haunted her dreams. I realized I couldn't let you walk away without knowing, without asking. His hand lifted, hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. Are you happy with him? His voice dropped to barely a whisper. This mate of yours, does he make you happy, Nora? The question was so unexpected, so achingly gentle. In all her imagined confrontations with him, she'd never expected this. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Your Majesty. A guard's voice shattered the moment like glass. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The northern border, there's been an attack. Nicholas's expression shifted instantly to the king she'd watched him become, all sharp edges and cold command, but his eyes stayed on her for one more heartbeat, searching for an answer she couldn't give. Then he was striding back toward the palace, his cloak billowing behind him, and Nora was left alone in the gardens with her lies and her breaking heart and the ghost of a question she had no answer to. Was she happy? 6 weeks earlier, the city, sprawled before Nora like a glittering wound, all silver spires and golden domes catching the late afternoon sun. From her position on the hillside, she could see the palace rising at the city's heart, a massive structure of white stone that seemed to swallow the light rather than reflect it. 3 years. 3 years since she'd fled this place with her heart in pieces, and now she was riding back toward it like a fool drawn to flame. Her mother's letter crinkled in her pocket. The words burned into her memory. The fever won't break. The healers say weeks, maybe days. Please come home. Home, as if this place had ever been home. As if the capital held anything for her but ghosts and the echo of promises that turned to ash. But her mother was dying in their small house near the eastern gate, and Nora would walk through fire for the woman who'd raised her alone after her father died in service to the crown. The same crown that sat on Nicholas's head now. The same service that had taught Nora from childhood that people like her were expendable. The summons had arrived 2 days after her mother's letter, sealed with the royal crest, formal and impersonal. Your presence is requested at the palace. A matter of urgency requires your particular expertise. The king commands your attendance. She'd stared at those words until they blurred. Commands, not requests, not asks. Commands, as if the past 3 years had never happened, as if he had any right to her time, her skills, her presence in his city. But the timing felt too convenient to be coincidence. Her mother falling ill just as Nicholas suddenly needed the best tracker in 3 kingdoms? No, she thought. He'd orchestrated this somehow, pulled strings she couldn't see to drag her back into his orbit. And it was working. The city gates loomed ahead, and Nora pulled her hood lower over her face. The guards barely glanced at her, just another traveler in worn leathers, anonymous in the evening crowd. Good. The longer she could move through the capital unnoticed, the better. She'd made it 3 blocks when the prickling started at the base of her skull. That 6th sense she'd honed over years of tracking, the one that kept her alive when lesser hunters became prey. She was being followed. Nora didn't break stride, didn't give any indication she'd noticed, but her hand drifted to the knife at her hip as she catalogued her surroundings. There, a shadow on a 2nd-story balcony that moved wrong. And there, someone in an alley entrance, too still to be natural. Royal guards. She could smell their scent even through the city's stench of horses and humanity, which meant Nicholas knew the moment she'd crossed into his territory, had probably known before she'd even reached the gates. The realization sent something hot and bitter coiling through her chest. 3 years of silence, and now he had eyes on her before she'd even seen her dying mother? She wanted to wheel her horse around and ride straight back, out. But her mother's fever-bright eyes haunted her, so Nora gritted her teeth and continued through the winding streets. The house looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The garden her mother had tended with such pride had gone wild, roses strangling the fence, herbs sprawling across the stone path in a fragrant riot. Nora's throat tightened as she dismounted and tied her horse to the post with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sickness and medicinal herbs that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of death. Her mother lay in the back bedroom, skeletal thin beneath piled blankets despite the summer heat raging outside. But her eyes cleared when Nora entered, and her cracked lips curved into a smile that broke something in Nora's chest. "There's my girl." Nora dropped to her knees beside the bed, taking her mother's papery hand in both of hers. "I'm here, Mama. I'm sorry it took so long. I came as fast as I could." "You're here, now. That's what matters." Her mother's voice was barely a whisper, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Tell me about your travels. I want to hear everything." So Nora talked about the mountains she'd crossed, the villages she'd helped, the hunts that had made her name whispered in fear and respect across 3 kingdoms. She talked until her voice went hoarse, until her mother's eyes began to droop, until the fever dragged her back under. The first night was the worst. Her mother's fever spiked as darkness fell, and Nora spent the hours bathing her forehead with cool water, spooning broth between her lips when she was lucid enough to swallow, holding her hand through the worst of the delirium. At some point past midnight, her mother's eyes opened with unusual clarity. "He still loves you, you know." Nora's hands stilled on the cloth. "Mama, I'm not blind, child." Her mother's laugh turned into a cough. "I saw how you looked when that summons arrived, like you'd been struck. It doesn't matter how he feels." Nora wrung out the cloth with more force than necessary. "He made his choice years ago." Did he? Or did a grieving boy make a choice he thought he had to make, and now a man is living with the consequences? He was 22, Mama. Hardly a boy. Old enough to be crowned, young enough to be stupid about love. Her mother caught Nora's wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me something. When I'm gone, and I will be gone soon, no need to protest. Promise me you'll at least listen to him. Hear what he has to say before you run again." "I'm not running. You've been running since the day you left this city." Her mother's eyes were too knowing, too clear. "I raised you better than to be a coward, Nora. At least give him a chance to grovel properly." Despite everything, Nora felt her lips twitch. "And if his groveling isn't enough, then you can gut him with my blessing." Her mother's eyes drifted closed. "But hear him out first." By dawn, the fever had broken. Her mother slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, her breathing deep and even. Nora allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd have more time than the healers predicted. She was dozing in the chair beside the bed, her head tilted back against the wall at an angle that would give her a vicious crick in her neck, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small house like judgment. Nora jerked awake, her hand going automatically to her knife. But when she cracked open the door, she found only a royal messenger on the step, looking deeply uncomfortable in his formal livery. "The king requests your presence at the palace." He wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Today, if you're able." "Tell the king I'll come when my mother is well enough to be left alone." The king anticipated you might say that. The messenger shifted his weight, and now Nora could see the sealed letter in his hand. "He asked me to give you this." She took the letter, like it might bite her. The seal was personal, not the official crest, but Nicholas's own mark, the one he'd carved into the oak tree where they used to meet, back when they were young and stupid and believed love could conquer duty. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. "Nora, I know you hate me. I know you have every right to refuse this summons and leave me to handle this crisis alone. But people are dying, and you're the only tracker skilled enough to stop it. I've sent my personal healer to care for your mother. Whatever she needs, whatever treatment might help, it's yours. No strings, no obligations. Even if you refuse to help me, even if you leave the capital the moment she's well enough to travel, I want you to have this. But I'm asking, not as your king, but as someone who once meant something to you. Please come to the palace. Let me explain what's happening. And then decide if you can stomach working with me long enough to save lives. If you truly can't bear to see me, I'll understand. But at least read the reports I'm sending with this messenger. Look at the evidence, and then tell me if you can walk away knowing what's at stake." "Yours." Nico Nora stared at the signature. Not Nicholas. Not the king. Nico. The name only she had ever called him, the one he'd forbidden everyone else from using after his coronation. She looked up at the messenger. "The healer?" "Already on her way, miss. Should arrive within the hour. She's the best in the kingdom. She kept the king himself alive through winter fever 2 years ago." Of course, Nicholas would send the best, would spare no expense. It was exactly the kind of thing that made hating him so impossibly complicated. "And these reports?" The messenger handed over a thick portfolio. "Everything we have on the attacks. The king said to tell you that if you decide to help, he'll clear his entire schedule for as long as you need." Nora took the portfolio, feeling its weight in her hands. She could walk, away, take the healer's help and leave the moment her mother was stable. Nicholas had said as much. No strings, no obligations. He was giving her an out. But then she thought about villages burning, about families slaughtered in the night, about tracks going cold because the trackers hadn't known what to look for. "Tell the king I'll come this afternoon," she heard herself say, "after the healer has seen my mother." The messenger bowed and retreated, and Nora leaned against the doorframe, already regretting her decision. The healer arrived exactly when promised, a stern-faced woman in her 50s who took one look at Nora's mother and started barking orders. Within an hour, she'd changed the bedding, adjusted the herb mixture, and gotten more broth into Nora's mother than Nora had managed in 2 days. "She'll recover," the healer said with brisk confidence as she packed her supplies. "The fever broke naturally, which is a good sign. But she'll need another week of rest before she's truly well. I'll come by every day to check on her." "I can't afford. It's already paid for." The healer's expression softened slightly. "The king's orders, and before you protest, you should know he didn't do it to manipulate you. He did it because he knows what your mother means to you, and he couldn't bear the thought of you losing her while you were here." Nora's throat went tight. "He told you that?" "He didn't have to. I've known that boy since he was in swaddling clothes." The healer gathered her bag. "He's made mistakes. God knows he's made mistakes, but loving you was never one of them." She left before Nora could formulate a response, and Nora was left alone with her sleeping mother and a long-buried truth she'd been trying to ignore. The palace looked different in afternoon light, less imposing somehow, though no less grand. Nora handed her horse to a stable boy and followed a servant through corridors that were painfully familiar. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the alcove where Nicholas had first kissed her when she was 16, refusing to remember how her entire world had shifted in that moment, how she'd felt like she was finally exactly where she belonged. She'd been dead wrong about that. She'd learned the hard way that girls born in servants' quarters didn't belong anywhere near crowns. The servant led her to a private study rather than the formal council chamber. The room was exactly as she remembered, maps covering every wall, books piled on every surface, the perpetual smell of ink and old paper, and Nicholas, standing by the window with his back to her, his shoulders tense. "Thank you for coming." He didn't turn around. "I wasn't sure you would. Your healer is very persuasive." Nora stayed near the door, maintaining distance between them. "And your letter mentioned people dying. I'm not heartless enough to ignore that, regardless of our history." "Our history?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what we're calling it now?" "What would you prefer I call it? Our youthful mistake? Our temporary insanity? You're the one who named it first." Finally, he turned to face her, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her resolve to stay angry. "I know what I said that night. I remember every word, Nora. They haunt me." "Okay, good. I told you it was a mistake because I thought—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it hurt. "I thought I was protecting you. The council was demanding I marry within a month, threatening to overthrow me if I didn't secure alliances. They had 3 candidates lined up, all nobility, all politically crucial, and they made it very clear that anyone standing in the way of those alliances would be removed, permanently." Nora's stomach clenched. "You never told me that." "Because I couldn't—" He stopped, jaw tight, turned away from her like he couldn't stand to see her face when he said it. "I was 22. The council made it clear you were a liability." "A liability?" "Their word, not mine." His hands were shaking. She could see it even from where she stood. "They said accidents happen, that the roads can be dangerous, that it would be a shame if—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than she intended. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. "I told you what we had meant nothing." His voice went hollow. "That I needed to focus on my duties, that you were a distraction I couldn't afford." She remembered that conversation, remembered every word like they'd been carved into her bones. "You looked me in the eye and said loving me had been a mistake. You said I'd always known what I was getting into, that I'd been naive to think. I know. He turned back to face her, and the rawness in his expression stopped her words. I've replayed that conversation every night since you left. The silence stretched between them. The females, Nora said finally. Everyone said your bed was a revolving door. I let people believe it because it was easier than admitting the truth, that I spent every night alone, wishing for someone I'd driven away. The council kept parading eligible ladies through the palace, kept pressuring me to choose, and I kept finding excuses. Too busy with border disputes, too focused on reforms, too anything except the truth that I'd already chosen 3 years ago, and she wanted nothing to do with me. Nicholas, I know it doesn't fix anything. I know I hurt you, but I need you to understand. His voice cracked. I need you to know that not a single day has passed where I didn't love you, where I didn't wish I'd been braver, stronger, better for you. Tears burned hot in Nora's eyes, but she blinked them back. You can't just say these things and expect. I don't expect anything. He stayed where he was, making no move to close the distance between them. I just needed you to know the truth, before we start working together. Nora's mind raced, trying to reconcile the story he'd told with years of carefully maintained fury, trying to decide if knowing his reasons changed anything, or if it just made everything more complicated. Finally, she sighed and said, "Show me the reports." Relief flickered across his face, followed quickly by understanding. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't even acceptance. But it was a start. He gestured to the massive table dominating the center of the room, and Nora stepped closer. Maps covered every inch of the surface, marked with red circles and scribbled notes. 4 attacks, just as the messenger had said. But seeing them laid out like this, seeing the pattern emerging, her tracker's mind immediately started noting details. Tell me everything, she said, falling into the familiar rhythm of a hunt. From the beginning. Nicholas moved to stand across the table from her, and for the next 2 hours, they worked. He walked her through each attack, the timeline, the casualties, the failed tracking attempts. She asked questions, sharp and precise, pushing for details he hadn't thought to include. And slowly, piece by piece, a picture began to form. They're not random raids, she said finally, tracing a path between the attack sites. Look at the spacing. Each one is exactly 3 days' hard ride from the last, and they're spiraling inward, toward the capital, toward the palace specifically. She marked another point on the map. If the pattern holds, the next attack should be here, the village of Millbrook, 10 days from now, on the full moon. Nicholas leaned over the map, close enough that she could smell the cedar and smoke scent of him, close enough to make her pulse jump. How did our trackers miss this? Because they were looking at each attack in isolation. They didn't have access to all the information at once, didn't see the full pattern. She tapped the map. This is coordinated, military precision, which means whoever is behind it has training, resources, and a very specific target in mind. Is it me? You, she confirmed. Question is, are they trying to kill you or just destabilize your rule? Why does that matter? It changes how we stop them. She straightened, rolling her shoulders to release the tension building there. If they want you dead, they'll make a direct assault on the palace eventually. But if they want to undermine your authority, make you look weak, then they'll keep picking off villages, making me look unable to protect my own people. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Either way, we can't let them hit Millbrook. Agreed. Nora studied the map, her mind already racing through possibilities. We set a trap. Send word that you're visiting the northern garrisons. Make yourself look distracted. Meanwhile, we position forces around Millbrook and wait for them to strike. We? She met his eyes across the table. You asked for my help. That means we do this together, or not at all. I'm not giving you information and then watching from the sidelines while you risk your life. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You're worried about me? I'm worried about the kingdom, she corrected, but her voice lacked conviction. If you die, there's a succession crisis, chaos, instability. Right, the kingdom. His gaze lingered on her a moment too long before his mouth curved into the ghost of a smile. Very practical of you. Someone has to be. She turned back to the map, more sharply than necessary, though she was keenly aware of him stepping closer, close enough that his warmth bled into her space. We'll need at least 20 fighters, maybe more. People you trust absolutely. Nora. The way he said her name made her breath catch. When she looked up, the intensity in his gaze felt devastatingly familiar, as though the years had melted away and he was seeing her again the way he used to. Thank you, he said quietly. For helping. For staying. For... He stopped, searching for words. For not walking away the moment you had the chance. Don't thank me yet. But something in her chest loosened, just slightly. We haven't caught them, haven't stopped the attacks, haven't proven I'm worth whatever you're paying me. I'd give you the entire treasury if you asked. He said it simply, like it was obvious. I'd give you anything, Nora. You know that. She did know. That was the problem. She'd always known, even when she'd tried to convince herself otherwise, even when anger and hurt had been easier than admitting the truth, that Nicholas loved her in the only way he'd known how. We should plan the departure for Millbrook, she said, retreating to safer ground. Figure out logistics, supplies, who we're bringing. Nora. And we'll need to coordinate with the local guard, make sure they don't accidentally. Nora. He moved around the table, and suddenly he was standing right in front of her, close, enough to touch. Before we do any of that, I need to know. Is there any chance at all, that you might forgive me someday? That we might find our way back to what we had? Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was her moment to say no, to set a boundary, to protect herself from the inevitable pain of wanting something she couldn't have. But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear warring there, she couldn't quite make the word form. I don't know, she admitted. I'm still angry, still hurt, and even if I wanted to forgive you, there are still all the same problems we had before. You're king. I'm common-born. The council will... I don't care about the council. The fierceness in his voice startled her. I've spent 3 years doing things their way, making choices based on political expedience, putting duty before everything else. And you know what I have to show for it? An empty bed, an aching heart, and a kingdom that's being attacked because I was too weak to stand up for what I wanted. He lifted his hand, letting it hover beside her cheek, as if the distance between them required permission. I should have fought for us, should have told the council to burn in hell and found another way. And I can't change the past, can't undo the hurt I caused. But I can promise you this. If you give me another chance, I won't waste it. I'll fight for us this time. Fight the council, fight tradition, fight the whole kingdom if that's what it takes. Nicholas, you don't have to decide now. His hand dropped back to his side. We'll go to Millbrook, stop these attacks, And then you can decide if I'm worth the risk, if we're worth the fight. But please, Nora, please don't close that door completely. Every good instinct told her to protect her heart, remember all the ways this could go wrong, but she'd never been very good at self-preservation where Nicholas was concerned. I won't close the door, she heard herself say, but I'm not promising anything either. We focus on stopping these attacks first. Everything else, we figure that out after. The smile that broke across his face was bright enough to rival the sun. That's all I'm asking, a chance. Don't make me regret this. I won't. He said it like a vow. I swear to you, Nora, I won't. The following week slipped by in a haze of preparation. They gathered a small circle of Nicholas's most trusted fighters, coordinated with the Millbrook garrison, and laid their plans with painstaking care. And somewhere amid the maps and late nights, Nora felt her resolve quietly begin to fray. Nicholas was not the boy she had known, nor quite the man she remembered. He listened now, weighed words before speaking. He asked instead of commanded, and when they argued, as they often did, voices sharp and tempers unguarded, he never reached for his crown to end the dispute. He met her as an equal, as a partner, as someone whose judgment he trusted implicitly. She tried not to notice how deeply that unsettled her, or how devastatingly attractive it was. I'm not the same girl who left, Nora admitted one night as they studied the Millbrook terrain. I've killed people, Nicholas. Not in battle, not in self-defense. I've hunted down rogues and ended them, and I don't lose sleep over it anymore. Good. His response surprised her. The world needs people willing to do hard things, to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. That's what makes you an excellent tracker, and what will make you an excellent queen if you ever want the job. She snorted. I'm not queen material. You're exactly queen material. You're smart, capable, ruthless when necessary, and compassionate when it counts. You care about justice more than law, people more than politics. The kingdom would be lucky to have you. The council would revolt. Let them. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. I'm done letting them dictate my life. Our life, if you'll have me. Nora's chest tightened. It's not that simple, Nicholas. Why not? I'm the king. If I can't change unjust traditions, what's the point of the crown? He set down the map he'd been studying and turned to face her fully. I know it sounds naive. I know there will be consequences, fights with nobles who think bloodline matters more than character. But I'm willing to face all of that, Nora. Are you? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Ask me again after Millbrook, she said finally. After we've survived whatever's coming, then I'll give you my answer. 3 days before they were set to leave for Millbrook, Lord Hayes made his move. It was subtle, a request for a private audience, a suggestion that Nicholas consider the benefits of an alliance with House Blackwood, a carefully worded offer to marry Hayes's sister in exchange for military support. But Nora had spent 3 years tracking predators, and she recognized the pattern. The timing was too convenient. Hayes had been at court for less than a month, had shown interest in Nora almost immediately, and now he was offering military support just as the kingdom faced mysterious attacks. It's him, she told Nicholas that night, after Hayes had finally left the study. He's behind the attacks. Nicholas looked up from the reports he'd been reviewing. That's a serious accusation. I know, but think about it. He arrives right as the attacks start. He positions himself as a potential ally, offers you his sister. And meanwhile, he's been circling me, trying to establish some kind of claim before you could. It's textbook strategy for someone planning a coup. You think he wants the throne? I think he wants you vulnerable and distracted. Nora moved to the map, tracing the attack pattern again. What better way to undermine a king than to make him look weak, unable to protect his own people? And if he can drive a wedge between us in the process, secure me as some kind of asset before I can what? Before you can convince me to stay, she admitted quietly. Nicholas was silent for a long moment. Then he pushed back from the desk and crossed to where she stood. You're brilliant. You know that? I'm a tracker. I see patterns. You're brilliant, he repeated, and this time his hand did touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with unbearable gentleness. And you're probably right about Hayes, which means we need to be careful. If he realizes we're onto him, he'll accelerate his timeline. Nora's heart raced at his touch, but she forced herself to focus. We can't let him know we suspect anything. We proceed with the Millbrook plan as scheduled, but we need to leave guards here. People you trust absolutely to protect the palace while we're gone. Already done. His hand slid back to cup her neck, his thumb finding her pulse point. I'm not as careless as I used to be. Good. Nora. His voice dropped lower, rougher. If this goes badly, if Hayes has more forces than we expect, if something happens in Millbrook. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Don't say goodbye. We're not doing that again. I'm not saying goodbye. He caught her hand, held it against his chest where she could feel his heart pounding. I'm saying I love you. I'm saying that if this is our last quiet moment before everything goes to hell, I want you to know that these past weeks, working with you, talking with you, just being near you again, they've been the best of my life. Even better than before, because now I know what it costs to lose you. Nicholas. Her voice broke, tears stinging her eyes. I know you haven't decided yet. I know you're still figuring out if you can trust me, if we can make this work. But I needed to say it. Needed you to hear it before. She kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through. But suddenly she was on her toes, her hands fisted in his shirt, her mouth finding his, with 3 years of longing behind it. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then he made a sound low in his throat and hauled her closer, kissing her back with a desperation that matched her own. His hands tangled in her hair, tilted her head for a better angle, and Nora gave herself over to the sensation of finally being exactly where she belonged. When they broke apart at last, both breathing hard, Nicholas pressed his forehead to hers. Was that your answer? That was me being terrified of losing you again before I figure out if I'm brave enough to keep you. She gripped his shirt tighter. Don't die in Millbrook, Nico. I won't. He kissed her again, softer this time. A promise. We're going to stop Hayes, save Millbrook, and then we're going to have a very long conversation about our future. Together. Together, she echoed, and let herself believe it might actually be possible. The journey to Millbrook took 2 days of hard riding. They kept the group small, just 20 of Nicholas's most trusted fighters, plus Lydia to coordinate strategy and logistics. Nora and Nicholas rode side by side at the front, close enough that their legs brushed occasionally, sending sparks of awareness through her every time. They didn't hide their connection anymore, didn't bother pretending they were just king and hired tracker. And if the fighters noticed, none of them commented. They were too professional, too loyal to Nicholas to question his choices. Or maybe, Nora thought as she watched the easy way Nicholas interacted with his people, they'd been waiting for this all along. waiting for their king to finally choose happiness over duty. They reached Millbrook 3 days before the full moon, and Nicholas immediately set to work. He met with the village leaders, walked the perimeter himself, helped reinforce defenses. And everywhere he went, villagers looked at him with something like worship. This was what she'd forgotten in years of exile, how good he was at this. Not just ruling, but leading, making people feel seen and valued and safe. He remembered names, asked about families, listened to concerns with genuine interest, and the villagers responded by offering everything they had to help protect their home. "You're staring," Lydia murmured to Nora as they watched Nicholas help a group of farmers construct a barricade. "I'm observing." "You're staring at him like he hung the moon." But Lydia's tone was fond rather than judgmental. "For what it's worth, I think you're good for each other. He's been miserable without you." He hid it well. "From everyone except those of us who've known him since he was a boy." Lydia's expression turned serious. "He made a mistake with you, a big one. But he's spent every day since trying to become the kind of man who deserves you, the kind of king who can protect the people he loves without sacrificing his own happiness." "Lydia, I'm not asking you to forgive him. That's your choice to make. But I am asking you to consider, what kind of life do you want? A safe one, where you never risk your heart again? Or a messy, complicated, beautiful one where you fight for what you want and maybe, just maybe, get everything you've ever dreamed of?" Nora didn't have an answer, but that night, when Nicholas found her on watch duty and stood beside her in comfortable silence, she thought maybe she was starting to figure it out. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not pressuring me, for giving me time. You're worth waiting for." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "However long it takes." The attack came on the night of the full moon, exactly as Nora had predicted. They swept in like shadows, 30 fighters in dark clothes, moving with military precision. But Nicholas's forces were ready, positioned perfectly to cut off escape routes and pin the raiders against the village defenses. The battle was short and brutal. Nora fought back to back with Nicholas, their movements synchronized like they'd never been apart. She'd forgotten how good he was in a fight, all controlled violence and strategic thinking, never a wasted motion. When the last raider fell, she was breathing hard, her knife bloody, her heart pounding with battle fury and relief. "Check them," she ordered, already moving toward the fallen leader. "Look for identification, anything that might—" She froze. The sigil on the leader's cloak was unmistakable. House Blackwood, Lord Hayes's family crest. "Nicholas," her voice came out strangled. "Nicholas, look at this." He crossed to her side, and she watched the realization dawn on his face. Understanding, followed quickly by fury. "Hayes." The name came out like a curse. "He's not just behind the attacks, he's leading them himself." "Wait." Nora's stomach dropped. "If his people are here, then he's not—" "The palace." Nicholas's eyes went wide with horror. "Oh God, the palace! While we're here, while our forces are split. He's staging a coup." Her words tasted like ash. "This was never about destabilizing you. It was about getting you away from the capital so he could take it." They ran for the horses. The ride back to the capital was a nightmare of speed and fear. They pushed the horses to the brink of collapse, rotating mounts at every village, maintaining a pace that should have been impossible. And all the while, Nora's mind raced with terrible possibilities. Hayes in the throne room, the palace guard overwhelmed, the council taken hostage or worse, Nicholas executed for treason in his own home. "We'll make it," she told him as dawn broke over the horizon. "We'll get there in time. And if we don't?" Then we take back what's yours. She met his eyes. Together. They reached the capital as the sun climbed toward noon. Smoke rose from the palace district in thick black columns, and the sounds of fighting echoed through the streets. But Hayes had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Nicholas would return through the main gates, would ride up to his own palace like any proper king. He'd positioned his forces accordingly, ready for a frontal assault. He didn't know about the hidden passages, the secret ways into the palace that only Nora and Nicholas remembered from childhood games and stolen moments. They gathered what remained of the loyal guard and struck from within. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they reclaimed the palace, each clash of steel echoing through the halls. Nicholas moved like a storm unleashed, every careful calculation of kingship abandoned, replaced by raw, blazing instinct. Nora stayed at his side, ducking under swinging blades, throwing herself between him and any who dared strike. A knife grazed her arm, burning hot, but she didn't flinch. By the time they reached the throne room, both were bloodied, clothes torn, hearts hammering. Hayes sat in Nicholas's chair, calm, infuriatingly composed. "You're too late," Hayes said, voice like ice. "I've sent word to the other kingdoms. They know. You abandoned your post, ran off with your childhood paramour. Even if you kill me, your reputation is ruined. Then I'll rebuild it." Nicholas's voice was steep. "Truth instead of political games. Step down, Hayes, and I'll let you live." Hayes laughed and drew his sword. The duel began. Hayes was fast, precise, every strike meant to maim. Nicholas countered with ferocity, sparks flying as steel met steel. Then, one sudden lunge, Hayes fainted, Nicholas twisted too far, and his footing gave out. He stumbled, and for a heartbeat he almost fell. Nora reacted without thinking. She leapt forward, catching his arm, her chest pressed against his as she steadied him. Their eyes met, close enough that she could see the pulse racing at his temple, the raw strain and exhaustion etched into his features. "You okay?" she whispered, breath hot against his ear. The moment was fleeting, but it ignited something unspoken, a reminder that no matter the chaos around them, they still had each other. Fueled by both fury and relief, Nicholas launched himself back into the fight. Hayes lunged again, but Nicholas anticipated every move, countering with the precision of a man defending everything he loved. Step by step, he drove Hayes back, until finally, with one furious push, he disarmed him, pinning the tip of his sword at Hayes's throat. "You lose," he said, low and ragged, "and you'll answer for every treachery." "Arrest him," Nicholas ordered to his guards, his chest heaving. "Seal his family's lands, and someone get the council." Hours later, when order had been restored and the last of Hayes's conspirators rounded up, Nicholas found Nora in the gardens. She was standing in the same spot where he'd asked if she was single. She looked exhausted, blood-stained, yet more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. "So," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion, "I believe you owed me an answer." Nora turned to face him, and the smile on her face made his heart stop. "You want to know if I'm brave enough to fight for us?" "Something like that." "I tracked patterns across 3 kingdoms, survived a coup, fought my way through a palace full of traitors." She crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "I think I can handle a difficult conversation with your counsel." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She rose on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Nicholas. I've loved you since I was 16 years old, and I'm done running from it. Thank God." He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers, "because I was running out of dramatic gestures. You're the king. You could have just commanded me to stay." Where's the romance in that? She laughed, and the sound filled something in his chest that had been empty for 3 years. So, what now? We face the council together and hope they don't revolt? We face the council together, he agreed. And if they revolt, we deal with it. Because I meant what I said, Nora. I'm done choosing duty over happiness, done letting fear make my decisions. From now on, we figure this out as partners. The council meeting 3 days later was exactly as explosive as expected. Half the nobles howled about tradition and bloodlines and the sanctity of arranged alliances. The other half, led by Lydia, who'd apparently been waiting years for this moment, pointed out that the common-born woman had just saved the kingdom from a coup, while their carefully vetted noble had tried to destroy it. In the end, Nicholas made it simple. I'm marrying Nora, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. If that's a problem for anyone here, there's the door. You can choose the woman who saved your lives, or you can choose a new king, but you don't get both. One by one, they bent the knee. The wedding was small by royal standards, just family and close friends, none of the pomp and ceremony the council wanted. Nora's mother cried through the entire thing, healthy again and radiant with joy. And when Nicholas slipped the ring onto Nora's finger, she felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Not naive hope. Not the kind that believed love could conquer all obstacles with no effort required, but the harder, more precious kind. The hope that came from knowing they'd choose each other, again and again, through every challenge that lay ahead. So, Nicholas murmured as they danced later that night, the celebration stretching into the small hours. How does it feel to be queen? Terrifying, exhilarating, completely surreal. She tightened her arms around his neck. Ask me again in a year when I've accidentally started a diplomatic incident. I'll love you just as much then. More, probably. I've always had a weakness for chaos. Good. She kissed him, soft and sure. Because I'm planning to cause quite a lot of it. Standing there in his arms, surrounded by people who loved them, Nora finally understood what her mother had been trying to tell her. Their love wasn't perfectly timed nor easy to choose. They were just two people who had weathered every risk, every doubt, every loss, and still found their way back to each other. And as the music swelled and Nicholas spun her across the floor, Nora let herself believe in forever again. Not the naive forever of their youth, but something harder won and infinitely more precious. A forever they'd earned, together. Thank you so much for listening. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.